Hello everybody. Welcome to the Bayer presentation as part of the AgServe Pest Tech for 2021. Today's presentation we're going to be exploring best practice spray applications and a bit of play on words. What's the point of runoff? We're going to be exploring spraying till the point of runoff, and we'll also be exploring what happens. We will be looking at some of the consequences of what happens when we exceed spraying to that point of runoff. So let's get into it. Now, as professional pest managers, one of the most used tools in our kit bag is hand spraying, and more specifically residual spraying. Now, the skills required to apply residual sprays could be considered as pretty straightforward or fairly straightforward, right? Firstly, we need to measure, then mix our residual product of choice with water. Then we just pump it up and pull the trigger, right? Pretty simple. But in reality, there really is a lot more going on than what we could first look at first glance. And in my role as a rep in my area, I still get calls and plenty of questions about applications to surfaces or varying surfaces, because this is where many issues can occur for the less experienced. So if we talk about application to surfaces and we have a look at this picture here, it doesn't get much easier than this. Now, here's an example of a repeatable surface, which is how and why we can calibrate our nozzles, our pressures, and our speed. And once all those things have set, it's pretty much set and forget. And we can continue to get a nice, even spray and even concentration of active ingredient across the whole of that surface. Now, wouldn't it be great if all of our surfaces were like that? But in reality, they're just not. Now, I think we're all familiar a lot more with this type of picture of surfaces that we're trying to spray, right? So conditions faced by pest controllers are much more challenging. Varying porosity, non-target surfaces, as you can see there, vertical surfaces, horizontal surfaces. It's a lot more challenging than a golf course, and I'm glad that it is, because it'd be pretty boring just spraying golf courses, right? But as experienced pesties, we make adjustments to our treatment on the fly to apply products successfully. But what is it that we are actually trying to accomplish? And what are our guidelines? If we were trying to write this down, and this is what we need to do as manufacturers when we're writing a label, what is it that we're actually trying to do when we're spraying this particular surface? I think it's a good time to have a look at a label. So here we can see a typical example of a label. This is a Bayer label. Now, most labels will distinguish between porous and non-porous surfaces. Now, this is a guide, which we will get into later, of the likely carrying capacity of the surfaces before runoff occurs. And we need to be able to differentiate between those, because some surfaces will take more application or more spray or solution than others. So if we think back to our house example, our picture of our house, we have multiple surfaces of varying porosity. So what do we do there? Does that mean that we have to mix up two separate tanks of different application rates? One for non-porous surfaces, and then mix up another tank for our porous surfaces, and then go around and treat those? Well, absolutely not. That's just crazy talk. So what do we do? And I think a good method is to work out what the majority of our surfaces are and mix accordingly, depending on what porosity of surface that would be. But at the end of the day, what we need to do is not forget our main goal, and that's do not exceed the point of runoff. So exceeding the point of runoff, what are we talking about? It's the term that's used to describe the point at which any given surface will no longer hold liquid on its surface and it will run off. And what's the bad thing about that? What are the consequences of exceeding runoff? Well, you can have off-target contamination. So if you're spraying too much on one given surface and it's running off, well, a lot of your active isn't going to be where it's meant to be, where you wanted it to be sprayed. Or it could be off-target contamination. Another example could be a surface that you didn't want to have any spray on it. And most importantly, we can also have a lot of surface marking and or staining. We can damage surfaces, which is not good.
Okay, so we've just carried out an internal spray treatment in the kitchen using the 4001 nozzle. Now we've come outside and we've discovered we're dealing with a few different surfaces here on the external wall. This surface here looks like an aluminium frame that's been powder coated. The powder coat over time has gone a little bit chalky or a little bit worn, so very easy to damage even with just water, especially if you're applying past the point of runoff. Right next to that we have this looks like a concrete tilt panel building that's been painted. Again, the paint is exposed to a lot of sunlight on this side of the building. Gone chalky over time. Very important not to spray past the point of runoff, otherwise you risk damaging the surface. Again, next to this, we have a ColourBond roller door. Over time, it's gone chalky as well. So the sun does damage surfaces quite badly, and as soon as you wet these surfaces and go past the point of runoff, you can risk damaging them. For this situation, we really only want to have one nozzle for the entire external treatment. We're looking at the 6502, and this would be for non-porous applications to the external of the building. Again, first two digits referring to the spray angle being 65 degrees. You would be getting the best application at approximately 46 centimetres away from the surface to be treated. The second two digits, 02, refer to the output rate, 0.2 gallons per minute at 40 psi. 0.2 gallons being approximately 760 millilitres per minute in the metric scale. What we'd like to achieve outside is a thorough application to the point of runoff. Point of runoff meaning just prior to the liquid dripping or running down the surface.
Now, we do have a couple of important tips or tech tips. The first one, be especially careful when you're applying to dirty surfaces, as runoff will further concentrate these deposits, causing runs and other aesthetic issues. Particularly on domestic jobs, consider advising the homeowners early to wash down their home prior to the treatment to avoid this issue. But and if you are concerned, if you just don't get any communication, you don't have time, if you don't get homeowner engagement, make sure that you test these areas if necessary and discuss with the client if you feel runoff will be difficult to manage in some of those areas. Our second tech tip, runoff can result in streaks and marking of painted surfaces, particularly those recently applied that have not yet aged or fully cured, those painted surfaces. Pay particular attention with dark colours, painted colours, and those that are facing the sun at the time of application. If a fence or a painted wall, or especially if it's newly painted, if that's been in the sun all day, these situations are most likely at risk to show marking from over application, even just from plain water. So you need to be very careful, and we're going to have a look at even just what plain water can damage.
Spraying to the point of runoff is extremely important for a number of reasons. First reason being, you've got to consider the emulsion as a vehicle for the active ingredient to be transmitted to the surface. So getting an application that is thorough prior to the point of runoff will allow the water to dry, and what that then does is leaves the active ingredient on the surface, which is creating your barrier against insects. So essentially it's think of the emulsion as a vehicle to transmit your active ingredient to the surface to get a complete and accurate barrier. So if your emulsion starts running down the wall, you've got two problems. One being you could potentially stain that surface and create an issue for trying to remove that stain, or obviously your homeowner, your customer's not going to be very happy with that or satisfied, you'll get a call back. Secondly, once the water or the emulsion runs down the wall, you're leaving an ineffective barrier. You're not allowing that water to dry and leave the active ingredient on the surface. Your barrier is essentially ineffective in those areas that the water has run down the surface. So very important to apply thoroughly prior to the point of runoff to allow the water to dry and leave the active ingredient on the surface where it should be. We're generally dealing with brass nozzles, so they do wear. If the pressure's too high, for example, they're designed to be accurate at approximately 40 psi out of the gun. So any higher, you risk the water or the pressure of the water coming out of the nozzle damaging the nozzle and creating an ill shape of the orifice. So essentially, if it's not shaped correctly, you can potentially not have the water vaporizing correctly or the correct droplet size, or you can risk it dripping down the nozzle and creating an overdosing situation or staining, or worse still, dripping it onto carpet or onto an area of timber floor or something that you could potentially stain and cause some problems with. If there's a blockage within the nozzle, you could be getting an incomplete spray pattern. So you might only be treating half of the area that you're thinking that you're treating. So there could be half of the nozzle is facing in one direction and you're not getting any spray to the other area. So having a blockage is obviously detrimental to your spray pattern and your application. So ensuring that your nozzles aren't blocked, one way of unblocking the nozzle you would think would be to use a metal pin or something in the orifice. It's very dangerous. Obviously you can deform the orifice and then create more problems for your spray pattern. The best way to resolve it would be possibly some air through the nozzle, remove the nozzle and try and possibly blow some air through it to release the blockage, or something like a blade of grass or something like that that's handy that you can push in through the nozzle to clean it out. But certainly not an object that is harder than the material used to create that nozzle, such as the brass. So any type of metal would be detrimental to your nozzle and your spray pattern. So if you've got an old nozzle, the shape of the nozzle is deformed. So essentially it's probably bigger and the hole's actually bigger than what it should be. And it's not putting out the correct pattern. So you'll be using a lot more emulsion. So you're wasting product. You risk staining that area or overdosing the area and spraying past the point of runoff. So it's important to check your nozzles periodically. I'd suggest brass nozzles, if you're using them quite a lot, they've probably got about a 12-month life cycle. So you should consider replacing your nozzles every 12 months if you're using them regularly. They can even corrode. Being brass can be susceptible to corrosion, and once they corrode, it can close in the size of the nozzle, again affecting the spray pattern. And once they've corroded, you can't really, there's no coming back from that. They're basically, throwaway item and replace them with a new item. Well, a flat fan as opposed to an adjustable cone nozzle, the main reasons you would be looking to use a flat fan nozzle is the ease of application to point of runoff. You've got a much better chance and it's much easier to have a correct application with a flat fan nozzle. As you can understand, the nozzle is in a flat fan, so as you're applying, you can evenly apply to a surface. Adjustable cone nozzle has an output with a circle. So essentially, if you're applying with an adjustable cone, you could be missing an entire area within the middle of that cone. The surface applied will be in a circle. If you're trying to apply to the point of runoff, you'll see two lines essentially along where you've sprayed, and you'll be missing an entire section in the middle. So you're not being able to create a uniform barrier, and also risk overdosing at the edges of that spray pattern and causing runs and staining down the surface. With a flat fan nozzle, that's alleviated. It's much easier to apply to the point of runoff, and essentially you've got a flat fan and you can have an even layer and an even surface to treat. It's a lot easier to treat to the right of the point of runoff and create a more effective barrier, more effective spray barrier.
So now we're going to have a look at some real world issues, some real world consequences that'll cause some stress to your hip pocket for those pest controllers that exceed the point of runoff and really don't heed the warnings that we're trying to say here in this presentation. So this is a real world case study from Jeff Einem, our market management developer. He's been with Bayer for a very, very long time. And he visited this actual site where we had received a complaint about an application of a suspension concentrate, a Bayer product, in a furniture production warehouse. Now the pest controller had sprayed various areas where there was some runoff noted to the pallet racking, and that pallet racking contained some raw timber furniture that was waiting to be put together and to be finished. Now the liquid dried with little or no evidence of runoff occurring, and the factory continued its production. But when the raw items were finished and color stained, those marks were visible. The runoff, the spray marks on that raw timber, once it was stained, they were visible. An investigation showed that the runoff had changed the timber and how it was stained and finished, and as a result, a substantial claim was made against the pest manager. Now, Bayer obviously conducted our own investigation, and that's what Jeff was part of, and it was later proven through this process and through this investigation that it was in fact water alone that was responsible for the damage. The addition of the suspension concentrate or the Bayer product, it played absolutely no part in the damage. So, if the pest controller went back at the start, if he was able to limit the runoff, or at worst just reported the situation, if he had reached out and told someone, try and cover his own ass, action may have been able to be taken to minimise the claim. They may have even been able to sand down the timber before it was constructed or even stained to perhaps prevent some of this damage. So really the moral to the story is always stop spraying, don't pull the trigger if you suspect some off-target application, and notify accordingly. And if you're in doubt, discuss your concerns with the client before pulling the trigger. We're now going to have a look at some examples. This was obviously done in-house. If we look at the top first, left to right, some examples of spraying a surface or spraying raw timber, and then treating that or staining that and looking at what can happen. So firstly, at the top left, we can see that we've sprayed this with a fine spray with Sizzlin, our suspension concentrate, and then it's been stained, and you can see some of the darkening along that piece of timber. If we have a look at the picture to the top right, we can see that where we've used a coarser spray, a more coarse nozzle, which has obviously shown a more darker staining once the timber has been stained. Now, if we have a look at the bottom, again left to right, this will explain how water alone is going to damage a surface. So it's not just about, or the conversation should not be product A will not stain and product B will stain, because if they're both using water as a carrier, you're going to be in trouble if if you're applying to a surface that could potentially be stained. Some of the surfaces or situations that we've described earlier within this presentation. So if we have a look at the 3 droplets, the first on the left being sizzling, and this is an excessive water droplet, the one in the middle being a bifenthrin product, and the one on the right just being water on its own. We've then aged that or let it sit for a while, which we'll see how long we've let it sit for, and then we have stained that surface. So now if we have a look at the picture on the right, it's the same piece of timber where those excessive water droplets were left to sit. Now in this case, on the left we have sizzling that was left to sit for 17 minutes before it was stained. The bifenthrin was left for 1 minute before being stained, and the water that was left for 30 seconds, I believe. I can't actually see. No, it was actually 4 minutes 30 seconds. You have to forgive my ugly bug in the presentation. 4.5 minutes the water droplet was left, just water alone, and then the surface had been stained. And you can see how water alone will stain, if not as bad as our suspension concentrates. So again, the conversation needs to be about the application not exceeding runoff and looking at the surfaces that you're applying and the conditions that you're applying them in versus product A, B, or C not leaving any stains. Now, just a quick update on how we are trying to make our labels more legible and more user-friendly for pest controllers. If you cast your mind back to the first label example that we showed at the top of the presentation, you saw how it was very confusing. There was 2 different rates, one for porous, one for non-porous, and not exceeding the point of runoff. You can see how we've cleaned it right up here. If we look at the section that's circled, now all we need to do is select our rate from the rate table, which is down the bottom here. Now this will depend on what residuality control that we're after or what we desire, and also what pests that we're trying to treat. That will determine what rate we're going to use there, and it's quite simple. And then what we have at the back also is just refer to the application details under general instructions, and that's where we will find our phrase. Our phrase being, do not exceed the point of runoff. So that concludes our AgServe Pest Tech presentation for 2021. I hope you've got something out of it, really highlighting the need, the importance of choosing and selecting the right nozzle for the right application, making sure we're not exceeding the point of runoff, and also looking at the consequences of what happens if we do that and if we don't put our hands up. If you're looking for any further information, we do have courses on this available on our Amplify website. I would encourage you all to go there and have a look at those. It's a great refresher, even for people that know what they're doing, if they've been in the industry for a long time. Also for newbies, obviously, that are getting into the industry for the first time or very, very fresh. But also, when we talk about these sorts of issues, I've had guys that have been in the industry for 10 or 15 years where they just haven't been shown, or they haven't been exposed. They don't even know there's different nozzles, or you know, how to treat varying surfaces, or why. So it's really good information for you to have, so you can go into your next job armed with the right information, the right knowledge, and the right tools for you to be successful. So thank you once again, and good luck.